As promised, I'm starting something on watercolor. A watercolor basics class that is going to help you paint your very first landscape painting in watercolor. So watch this video if at the end you want to be able to have your first landscape painting in watercolors and work with a lot more confidence. Before we get into the watercolor demo, I want to quickly thank today's sponsor, Skillshare. If you're a beginner artist or a creative in general, Skillshare is another great place to start learning. It's an online learning community with thousands of classes, not just art, but baking, writing, photography, illustration, and even entrepreneurship. Because I paint so much, I'm always looking for alternative creative pursuits to keep things fresh. And one of the things I've been learning more about lately is lino cut printing, especially for landscapes, but in general, just trying to get the fundamentals. So right now I'm taking these lino cut classes on Skillshare, and let me show you what that looks like. What I really like about Skillshare is that the instructors are real working artists, sharing practical experience-based tips. These classes aren't theoretical, they include projects, so you're actually doing the work and getting results. You can share your projects, see what other members are making, get feedback, and learn completely at your own pace. In this class, I've picked up some key topics on cutting the lino, printing, and all these little things that would have cost me a lot of time if I tried to figure it out on my own. To make it easy to try, there are 500 free trial months available. Scan the barcode on the screen now or find the link in the description. And now back to the watercolor lesson. Right, this is the reference, and you can see that I've chosen something with a good strong light and dark contrast. This will make things a lot easier for us. And here's a technique that's going to help you isolate these shapes a lot simpler, and that is to turn it upside down so you're not thinking about trees and roads and things like that, but just abstract shapes. A technique you've seen me use before is just to get something like a pastel, for instance, and outline the shapes. I'm combining all the darks as one big mass shape, the foreground trees and the distant trees, because they're basically the same value. Then we've got the lights for the sky. Not much there, it's a very small bit of sky showing. We've got a middle value landscape and darks for the trees. Now let's do a little no-tan study, a technique that I always recommend you do, and I like to use these wedge tip markers it helps me sort of paint the dark shapes. First step in getting my ideas across. So I'm leaving a little bit of a gap there for the tree trunks because they are quite important. And we've got the darks in the distance, we've got the tree overhead in the foreground. And now I'm going to put in the middle value, which is a basic grey. These markers are available in most art shops. I think these are Copic markers. So there's the value scale, and you can see the dark, middle, and light. The light I'm just leaving for the white of the paper, obviously. And so if I can create this value pattern using the watercolors, my 3-value landscape will automatically appear. And that's the magic of painting values instead of thinking about leaves, twigs, and grass and all those sort of things. The sky, the land, and the trees. That's what the painting's about. I'm using Fabriano 300 gram or 140 pound cold pressed paper, putting the tape around it just to make sure there's no buckling and keep some control of the page. Clean water, I use a few synthetic hair brushes, maybe a mop and a couple of round brushes, just very simple like that. I've got my watercolor tubes squeezed out in this little container, my mixing tray, which I always leave a bit messy because it helps me get nice grays when I need that for my landscapes. So I'll draw out the composition very, very simply based on those shape studies you've already isolated. The dark shape across the foreground, the road, the distant tree line, just to help you get your aim together when you start putting the brush down. At this point, for your first landscape painting, don't worry about having the drawing too detailed. It's deliberately kept simple. So as we get into the first wash, that's going to be a very loose and watery wash of deep yellow. And I'm simply going to cover the whole paper to get that warmth of the sunlight into the scene. Using some tissue, I'm going to lift up where the lightest lights are. A little bit on the road there as well in the distance. And that's just to speed things up a little. As we leave it to dry, this first wash must dry thoroughly. You can see there how it's faded as it's dried away. On the left I have my warms, on the cools on the right, and these on the extreme right I will leave for more grey mixes. So on to the second wash, which will be the middle values. Now I'm following this step-by-step procedure simply to make this process easier, because once you put down the light colors, it all becomes about the darker values. So we'll leave the darks till last. I'll get down these middle value greens, a warm green, a bit of blue and yellow, some lemon yellow in this case, ultramarine blue, have a little bit showing through between the tree trunks, and a little bit of burnt sienna to get the road in there, keeping it also fairly thin. There's a touch of yellow ochre. And you can see I'm not using very wet washes for this. I don't want the paint to run around too much. So we're going to keep control of our watercolor by just keeping a little less water on the brush for these middle values and the darks as well. It's just that first wash gets a lot of water. Just raising that horizon line ever so slightly. Alright, we're going to get the third wash, and that's the dark values. So ultramarine, a little touch of yellow, and just want to get this tree shape put in. It's not going to be the last wash, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let's just get this layer of dark value down, and because it's a sunny day, the darks are going to contain quite a lot of blue, so I'm using ultramarine. You can add just a little bit of your deep yellow to it as well if you want to put down the dark green. Nice and dark and shadowy down here. And then the edges, just soften them up, make them sort of broken edges to let a bit of light through there. And now I'm going to get the distant tree line, and that I'm going to leave a little thinner just to push it back with a bit of atmospheric perspective. So I've just made this layer, as I said, just a little thinner. I've actually used a touch of cobalt blue for this, but you can use your ultramarine. Alright, now soak up the excess water on my big brush, and I'm going to add just a little bit of the road shadow with burnt sienna and some blue. Broken dabs of color to suggest a bit of dappled light. Okay, so now we've got our 3 values down. I'm going to let this settle for a bit. It doesn't have to be entirely dry, because ideally you want to work in a surface that is wettish. As you get more confident, you'll be working wet into wet with a bit more in the future. But yeah, we want to just remain in control a bit. So a semi-dry surface, and now we're going to really give the dark values a lot more punch with a second wash of slightly more pigment as well, blue and yellow, to get some deep greens. And it's this dark foreground value that's going to make the painting look more light-filled. As these darks come forward, the lighter background colors recede and look like there's more distance as well with atmospheric perspective. I'm using a little mop brush here for this, but you can use any sort of larger filbert or even a flat, long flat brush. For these trees in the background, a little more pigment lower down, leaving the tops quite airy and atmospheric. A little more color in the foreground so it rises up to us visually, helping to create a bit more space between foreground and the distance. Alright, now a little bit of detail, and it's a very small suggestions of details here, lines in the road. I'm using some burnt sienna, just a little dry in this case, so I'm going to put a bit of more water on the brush and just spread this color out a little, and it will all settle down as it dries, because watercolor does all its work while it's drying. Long after you've finished using the brush, the painting sort of settles and creates itself. We're just setting the pigment on, get a little more dappled light in this foreground. How you finish a painting becomes a very personal part of your style with time and practice. I'm going to make a little bit of burnt sienna to suggest these tree trunks, add a little bit of color into that, but not much more. A few fence posts along the roadway and we're basically done. And this is just to illustrate how quickly and simply a 3-value landscape can take shape. And in no time at all, you're going to have your first watercolor landscape done with a lot of confidence. Well, I hope you enjoyed that first beginning stage of landscape painting and that you enjoy painting your first landscape in watercolors. If you want to get more out of this series in the future, make sure you subscribe to this channel as well and hit the notifications bell so you don't miss any videos coming up. After 6 months, you're going to see a big change in your landscape painting, for the better, of course. Alright, don't forget as well, you can get your free subscription to Create Art magazine in the description below. Well, until next time, enjoy your watercolor painting and cheers for now.